In an almost empty lobby, a billionaire finds a little girl gently tapping a vending machine. In a soft voice, she whispers, "Maybe something will fall," because she hasn't eaten in 3 days. Moved by a pain that numbers can't explain, he kneels down, and what he did there changed their lives forever. Chapter 1. The marble floors of the Manhattan office building echoed with each step William Harrison took as he crossed the nearly empty lobby. It was late, past the hour when most people had already gone home to their families, their warm dinners, their comfortable lives. William had none of those things waiting for him, just an empty penthouse and perhaps another glass of bourbon to help him sleep. His shoes, worth more than most people earned in a month, clicked against the polished stone as he headed toward the exit. That was when he saw her. A small figure stood in front of the vending machine near the security desk, barely tall enough to reach the selection buttons. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with light brown hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in days, and a simple dress that had seen better times. Her small hands pressed against the glass, and she was talking to herself or perhaps to the machine, in a whisper so quiet William almost missed it. He slowed his pace, something pulling at his attention. The child tapped the glass gently, as if trying to coax one of the snacks to fall by accident. Her fingers left small prints on the surface, and William noticed how thin those fingers were, how the dress hung loose on her small frame. She didn't notice him approaching. She was too focused on her mission, tilting her head and studying the rows of chips and candy bars like they were treasures behind glass in a museum. William found himself stopping a few feet away, observing this strange scene. In all his years coming and going from this building, he had never seen a child here, especially not alone at this hour. The girl sighed, a sound so filled with resignation that it seemed impossible to come from someone so young. She pulled her hand back from the glass and looked down at her worn sneakers. The rubber on one side was coming loose, and there was dirt on her knees, the kind that came from sitting on sidewalks or curling up in corners. Something shifted in William's chest, an unfamiliar sensation he couldn't quite name. It felt like recognition, though he wasn't sure of what. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle her. The child jumped anyway, spinning around with wide eyes. They were blue, he noticed, and filled with a mixture of hope and fear that made him take an instinctive step back. She looked ready to run, her small body tensing like a rabbit sensing a predator. William raised his hands slightly, palms out, the same gesture he used in boardrooms when negotiations got tense. But this wasn't a negotiation, and this wasn't an opponent. This was a scared child, and he realized with some discomfort that his usual commanding presence was exactly the wrong tool for this situation. He lowered himself slowly, bringing his tall frame down until he was closer to her eye level. The cold marble pressed against his expensive suit pants, but he didn't care. Up close, he could see more details that troubled him. The shadows under her eyes, the way her lips were chapped, the dirt under her fingernails. His voice when he spoke was softer than it had been in years. The voice he used in boardrooms to intimidate grown men was replaced by something gentler, almost foreign to his own ears. He asked her why she was hitting the machine, though he already suspected the answer. He just wanted to hear her speak, to confirm she was real and not some hallucination brought on by too many late nights and too much stress. The girl hesitated, her eyes darting between William's face and the exit behind him. She was calculating escape routes, he realized. This child, who should have been thinking about dolls and cartoons, was instead thinking about survival. The realization hit him harder than any business loss ever had. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she admitted she had no money. She said maybe something would fall by accident if she kept trying. Maybe she'd get lucky. The word lucky coming from her mouth felt like a cruel joke. William felt something crack inside him, some wall he had built over decades of ruthless business dealings and calculated decisions. He reached into his pocket, feeling the leather of his wallet. Chapter 2. William pulled out a $20 bill, but the girl's eyes widened with something close to panic. She shook her head quickly, taking a small step back. She wasn't used to kindness, he realized. Or maybe she had learned that kindness always came with a price. The thought made his throat tight. He stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, and walked to the vending machine. The girl watched him with those cautious blue eyes as he fed bills into the slot. He pressed buttons, and the mechanical arm inside whirred to life. The first candy bar dropped with a satisfying thud that made the child flinch. Then another, and another. Chips, cookies, a chocolate bar, a package of crackers. Each falling item seemed to mesmerize her, as if she were witnessing actual magic. When he gathered the items and turned to offer them to her, she didn't move immediately. Her small hands twisted together, and she looked between the food and his face with an expression that broke something in William he didn't know could still break. Finally, she reached out with trembling fingers and took a package of crackers. He expected her to tear into it immediately, but instead she opened it with careful, deliberate movements. She took out one cracker, just one, and ate it slowly, savoring every crumb. Then she carefully folded the package closed and held it against her chest like it was precious treasure. The gesture told him everything he needed to know about hunger and scarcity and a life he had never had to live. William found himself asking questions he never thought he would ask a stranger, especially not a child. Where were her parents? Did she have somewhere to go? The answers came slowly, reluctantly, each one worse than the last. She didn't know where her mother had gone. She had been alone for what she described as many days, though her concept of time seemed uncertain. Sometimes she slept outside. Sometimes she found warm places to hide. Each answer was a punch to his carefully constructed world. William Harrison, who controlled millions of dollars with the stroke of a pen, who had built an empire from calculated risks and cold decisions, found himself completely unprepared for the reality standing before him in a dirty dress and worn sneakers. He asked her name. "Emma," she whispered. Just Emma. No last name offered, and he didn't push. The lobby suddenly felt too exposed, too cold. The security guard at the desk was watching them now, and William saw the moment recognition crossed the man's face. He could already imagine the gossip, the questions, but found he didn't care. What he cared about was the fact that this child was hungry and alone, and it was getting dark outside. He asked Emma if she had eaten anything hot recently, a real meal, not just crackers stolen from vending machines or scraps found in trash bins. She shook her head, and the resignation in that small gesture made his decision for him. There was a cafe 2 blocks away, quiet and discreet. The kind of place where people didn't ask questions if you paid enough. But first, he had to convince Emma to trust him, which proved harder than any merger negotiation he had ever conducted. She was scared, understandably so. A strange man, no matter how well dressed, was still a stranger. He explained he just wanted to buy her dinner, something warm, and then she could go wherever she wanted. No strings, no tricks. He tried to make his face as open and honest as possible, though he wasn't sure he still knew how to do that. It was the mention of hot soup that finally swayed her. She nodded, a tiny movement, and when he offered his hand to help her walk, she stared at it for a long moment before placing her small, cold fingers in his palm. Her hand was so light he barely felt it, like holding a bird that might fly away at any moment. They walked out of the building together into the New York evening, an unlikely pair that drew stares from the few people still on the street. William in his $3,000 suit, and Emma in her threadbare dress and broken shoes. He felt her grip tighten slightly when they passed a group of people, her instinct still telling her to be invisible, to hide. Chapter 3. The cafe was warm and smelled of coffee and fresh bread, a sharp contrast to the cold evening air outside. The owner, an elderly woman named Rosa who had known William for years, raised her eyebrows when she saw him walk in with a small child, but had the grace not to ask questions. She simply led them to a quiet corner booth and brought menus without comment. Emma climbed onto the leather seat and seemed to shrink into herself, looking around at the polished wood and soft lighting, as if she had entered a palace she had no right to be in. William ordered soup, bread, and hot chocolate without asking what she wanted, sensing that too many choices might overwhelm her. When the food arrived, steaming and fragrant, Emma just stared at it. He had to encourage her to eat, to tell her it was okay, that no one would take it away. Even then, she ate slowly, carefully, like someone who had learned that food was never guaranteed. The hot chocolate sat cooling in front of her as she focused entirely on the soup, spooning it into her mouth with a concentration that seemed almost reverent. William found he couldn't eat his own meal. He just watched this small person across from him, this child who had somehow appeared in his carefully controlled life and turned everything sideways. He thought about his penthouse apartment, with its empty rooms and expensive furniture, that no one ever sat on. He thought about the board meetings and the deals and the endless pursuit of more, always more, never enough. And he thought about a question Emma had asked him, quietly between bites of bread. She had looked up at him with those two old eyes and asked why he was helping her, why he cared what happened to a kid he didn't know. The question had caught him off guard, and he found himself saying something he hadn't planned, something that came from a place he usually kept locked away. He told her that no one should be alone, that everyone deserved to have someone who cared whether they were safe or hungry or scared. The answer seemed to satisfy her, or at least confuse her enough to stop asking. She went back to her soup, but William noticed her shoulders had relaxed slightly, the defensive hunch easing just a fraction. As the evening wore on and the cafe began to empty, William faced a reality he had been avoiding. Night was falling, and he had no idea where Emma went when darkness came. The thought of leaving her on some street corner, of watching her walk away into the shadows, felt impossible now. It would be a betrayal, another abandonment in what he suspected had been a life full of them. He broached the subject carefully, asking where she usually stayed when it got dark. Her answer was vague and troubling, mentioning doorways and parks and places where police didn't look too closely. The casual way she said it, as if sleeping outside in October in New York was perfectly normal, made him feel sick. He heard himself offering before he had fully thought it through. He had a large apartment, he said, extra rooms. She could stay the night somewhere warm and safe, and in the morning they could figure out what came next. He tried to make it sound casual, like it was no big deal, though his heart was pounding in a way it hadn't in years. Emma looked at him with suspicion and something that might have been hope. She asked what he wanted in return, and the question revealed more about her short life than any amount of questioning ever could. William felt anger rise in his chest, not at her but at whatever and whoever had taught this child that safety always came with a price. He told her he wanted nothing. He just didn't want her to be cold or scared tonight. That was all. It took several more reassurances before she finally nodded, a tiny movement that somehow felt like a victory more significant than any deal he had ever closed. They left the cafe together, and William hailed a cab with Emma's small hand still clutched in his. She climbed into the back seat and pressed her face against the window, watching the city lights blur past. He gave his address to the driver, and the enormity of what he was doing began to settle over him. He was bringing a homeless child to his home. A stranger, someone he knew nothing about, except that she was alone and needed help. Chapter 4. The penthouse apartment occupied the entire top floor of a building overlooking Central Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering city below. Emma walked in slowly, her eyes wide as she took in the space that was probably larger than any building she had ever been inside. The polished hardwood floors reflected the city lights, and the modern furniture looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than somewhere people actually lived. She stood in the entryway, not moving further in, as if waiting for permission to exist in this space. William realized she felt like an intruder, someone who had wandered into a place she didn't belong. He tried to explain that this was just a home, just a place to sleep and be safe, but the words felt hollow even as he said them. This wasn't just a home, it was a monument to success and wealth. Found to someone who had spent their life on the streets, it must have seemed like another planet entirely. He showed her the guest room, with its queen-sized bed and soft carpet and attached bathroom. Emma stared at the bed as if she had never seen one before, or at least not one like this. She asked if she could sleep on the couch instead, and William understood. The bedroom was too much, too overwhelming. The couch was smaller, more manageable, closer to what she might be used to. He brought her blankets and a pillow, and she curled up on the leather sofa with the same careful movements she had used with the crackers, like she was afraid she might break something or be asked to leave if she took up too much space. William told her she could stay as long as she needed, that she was safe here, and her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite read, before she nodded and pulled the blanket up to her chin. He sat in the armchair across from her, not quite ready to leave her alone, and they existed in silence for a while as the city hummed outside the windows. Eventually her eyes began to close, her small body finally relaxing, after what must have been days or weeks of constant vigilance. William watched her fall asleep, and felt something shift fundamentally in his chest, some understanding that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The next morning, he woke early and prepared breakfast, more food than two people could possibly eat: eggs, bacon, toast, fruit juice, coffee for him and milk for her. When Emma emerged from the living room, her hair messy and her eyes still heavy with sleep, she stared at the spread on the dining table with the same reverence she had shown the soup. She ate slowly, trying everything, and William found himself cataloguing each small pleasure that crossed her face. The way she closed her eyes when she tasted the strawberries, how she held the glass of orange juice with both hands like it was precious. These were experiences most children took for granted, but for Emma they were small miracles. Over the following days, a routine began to form. Emma slowly relaxed, though she still moved through the apartment like a ghost, always careful, always grateful, never asking for anything. She drew pictures with pencils William bought, filling page after page with images of houses and families, and holding hands. She told him she liked stories but had never owned a book. She mentioned music made bad days smaller. Each revelation added another layer to his understanding of her life before. But the outside world wasn't content to let them exist in their bubble. It started with a photo, taken by someone with a phone on the street. William Harrison, billionaire CEO, walking hand in hand with a mysterious child. The image went viral within hours. Then came the articles, the speculation, the theories. Was this a secret daughter, an affair, some bizarre publicity stunt? His phone wouldn't stop ringing. His assistant called 17 times in one day. Board members sent urgent emails demanding explanations. The pressure mounted with each passing hour, and William felt it pressing in from all sides. But when he looked at Emma, carefully arranging her colored pencils by shade, he found he didn't care what they thought. His advisors held an emergency meeting in his office. They sat around the conference table, expensive suits and concerned faces, and they told him to think about the brand, the investors, the reputation he had spent decades building. Someone suggested calling child services, letting the professionals handle it. The word professionals was said with such clinical detachment that William felt his hands curl into fists. Chapter 5. William refused every suggestion, every recommendation, to distance himself from the situation. The loss he feared now had nothing to do with stock prices or market share. It was the thought of Emma leaving, of her small hand not being in his anymore, of her drawings disappearing from his refrigerator. That terrified him in ways business failures never had. But Emma was more perceptive than he gave her credit for. She noticed the whispered phone calls, the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile seemed forced sometimes. One evening she asked him quietly if she was causing problems. The question nearly broke him. He knelt down to her level, the way he had that first night in the lobby, and told her she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He meant every word, yet the external pressure continued to build. A particularly vicious article suggested the entire thing was emotional manipulation for publicity, that William was using a vulnerable child to humanize his corporate image. The words were cruel and calculated, designed to plant seeds of doubt. Emma read parts of that article on a tablet she had found in the living room. William didn't realize she had seen it until it was too late. That afternoon, while he was in a video conference, she slipped out of the apartment. She didn't take anything except the original package of crackers he had bought her that first night, which she had kept hidden in her room like a talisman. When William discovered she was gone, panic seized him, unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not in boardroom battles or market crashes or hostile takeovers had he felt this kind of raw fear. He called his security team, his assistant, anyone who might help, and then he did something he hadn't done in years. He went looking himself on foot through the streets of Manhattan. He found her as night was falling, curled up near the same vending machine where they had first met. She was trying to make herself small, invisible, the way she must have done for so long before he found her. When she saw him approaching, she didn't run. She just looked at him with red-rimmed eyes and said maybe it would be better if she wasn't with him anymore. Maybe then people would leave him alone. William knelt on the cold marble floor, not caring about his suit or the security guard watching or anything except the small person in front of him. He told her that no one, absolutely no one, got to decide what family meant to him. And if she still wanted him, if she could still trust him, he would choose her every single day. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because she mattered more than any company or reputation or opinion. The reconciliation was silent but powerful. Emma threw her arms around his neck and held on like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in the world. They stayed like that for a long time, two people who had both been alone finding something in each other they hadn't known they needed. The next day, William called a press conference. Emma stood beside him, her small hand in his as camera flashes exploded around them. He spoke clearly and without hesitation. He told the story of meeting her, of finding her hungry and alone, of making the choice to help that had turned into the choice to stay. He announced he was beginning formal adoption proceedings, that Emma wasn't a secret or a scandal, but a person who deserved safety and love. He said anyone who wanted to challenge that decision would have to go through him first. The room erupted with questions, but it was Emma who silenced them. In a voice that was small but steady, she spoke into the microphone. She said she used to think she didn't matter, that she was invisible. But now she had a home and someone who cared. The raw honesty in her words struck something in the room, in the people watching, in the public consciousness that had been so quick to judge and speculate. Letters began arriving at his office. Emails flooded his inbox. Most were supportive, people thanking him for showing humanity, for using his privilege to help someone who needed it. The public narrative began to shift, slowly at first, then more decisively. But not everyone was convinced. A district attorney questioned his motivations and stability, requesting evaluations and interviews and reports. A social worker appeared at his apartment unannounced, asking pointed questions about why a man so busy with business would take on such responsibility. Chapter 6. William answered honestly, though the truth cost him something to admit. He told the social worker that maybe he himself had needed to be chosen once and never was. The words hung in the air, revealing a wound he had carried for decades. He shared what he had never told anyone in his professional life, how he had spent time in foster care as a child, how he had been returned twice by families who decided he wasn't what they wanted, how he had eventually been sent to boarding schools where connections were discouraged and success was the only acceptable outcome. The revelation changed something in the room. The social worker's expression softened, and the questions became less accusatory, more genuinely curious about his ability to provide stability. William described the routines they had built, the way Emma was beginning to trust, the small signs of healing he saw every day. By the end of the visit, the social worker seemed satisfied, noting in her report that the child appeared well cared for and genuinely attached. But the corporate world was less forgiving. In a closed-door meeting, the board delivered an ultimatum. Choose the company or choose the child. The adoption proceedings were creating too much controversy, affecting investor confidence, putting the brand at risk. They needed him to step back from this personal matter and refocus on business. The implications were clear. Refuse and face removal from his own company. William walked out of that meeting and directly to the press room. Without consulting anyone, without carefully crafted statements or PR approval, he told the assembled reporters that if he had to choose between a corporation and a child, the choice was simple. He would choose Emma every time. Success without integrity, he said, was just vanity wearing an expensive suit. Some things mattered more than quarterly earnings, and he had finally found one of those things. The adoption process moved forward through months of paperwork and evaluations and hearings. William attended every appointment, answered every question, submitted to every background check with the patience of someone who knew exactly what they were fighting for. He watched Emma slowly transform from a scared, cautious child into someone who laughed sometimes, who asked for things she wanted, who drew pictures of families that included both of them. One evening, he found her asleep on the couch, clutching a stuffed bear he had bought her, the first toy she had admitted wanting. The sight filled him with a purpose that no business achievement had ever provided. He understood then that he hadn't just found Emma that night in the lobby. She had found him too, pulling him back from a life that was successful but empty, impressive but meaningless. The finalization hearing took place in a modest courtroom, nothing like the grand conference rooms where William usually conducted important business. The judge asked Emma directly if she wanted William to be her family. Her yes was clear and certain, no hesitation at all. When William was asked to sign the papers, his hand shook slightly, emotion overwhelming the steady control he usually maintained. With his signature, Emma officially became Emma Harrison, and the judge smiled as she declared them a family in the eyes of the law. They returned home together, and Emma spent the afternoon arranging her room, which was no longer a guest room but truly hers. She asked him a question that pierced his heart with its vulnerability. Did he think whoever brought her into the world would be proud of who she was becoming? William told her yes, absolutely yes, and added that she now had someone who would be proud of her every single day of her life. Before bed, Emma mentioned something that made his breath catch. She said waiting by that vending machine had led her to this moment, to this home, and it had been worth every scared, hungry night. A few days later, Emma woke to voices in the kitchen. William had risen early to prepare a small cake, slightly lopsided because baking wasn't his strength, decorated with chocolate hearts drawn in careful loops. A single candle stood in the center. He had remembered her wish, the small dream she had shared weeks ago about wanting just one birthday with a cake and a candle. When she walked into the kitchen and saw it, her face transformed with wonder. She approached slowly, touching the edge of the plate like she needed to confirm it was real. William lit the candle and sang Happy Birthday, his voice rough with emotion. Emma closed her eyes, made a wish, and blew out the flame with careful reverence. She told him that being remembered felt bigger than any present she could imagine. In that moment, William understood something profound. Greatness wasn't measured in buildings owned or deals closed or wealth accumulated. It was measured in the capacity to stay, to be home for someone, to choose love when everything else said to choose success. He had spent his life climbing toward something he thought mattered, only to discover that what actually mattered had been waiting for him in an empty lobby, by a vending machine, in the form of a small child who needed someone to choose